All right, y'all ready? So I'd like to call to order the April something, 18th, thank you, meeting of the Warrant Ethics Committee, 2024. Yep. We'll start with the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Do you have any amendments to the agenda? Okay. So then the first item is to adopt the minutes from March 21st.
I will so move.
Okay. Do you have a second?
Second.
Okay. Any amendments, changes, concerns? Okay, hearing none. All in favor of accepting the minutes, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, abstained. Good. Great. Yay, Carl's first minutes are on the
All right.
record. Good job. All right. So just the ongoing town email, we started talking before this meeting, Neil's having some issues getting the two-factor authentication going. Everybody else have access to that now?
I do not.
You do not? Okay.
I have been negligent in
Okay.
getting that done.
I'll keep sending to your other email until we.
Same is true for me. I'm having, as I said, technical issues with Outlook, but I'll
Okay.
continue to work to resolve
Sure,
that.
so I'll just keep sending them to your old ethics email. Carl and I are
Yeah.
on. All right, so at least Carl and I will get the broadcast emails. If someone sends something to the Warrant Ethics Committee, I'll just forward. Well, not next week, but after that I will. And then we still need to get those processes on the webpage.
Yeah, that's what I was sitting here trying to
Okay,
do. I'm missing, I think, pre-hearing process and the waiver form.
Okay,
I'm just looking through my folders, so.
sure, I
I
will,
have the website up here, I can't use it.
okay. Unless anybody has one with them? No? All right, but that's moving forward. And then, I was looking at the Code of Ethics that we have linked, and it says adopted by, and there's a blank line on the date. And so when I went to put it into the training, I noticed that it doesn't have it, the date filling of when the Code of Ethics went into play. So on the training, I put in, I took the date that Neil had on his implementation, and I went backwards 60 days, and I guessed, but I don't know if anyone has the date that that was adopted, and if so, we'll need to like amend the document probably to put the date in, maybe.
I'd have to go back in through minutes.
Well, no, no, this was from 2006.
Oh, okay.
Like when they first voted it in.
My understanding is that there was a relatively simple warrant article.
Yes, so
Which
that's.
said, check it out in the clerk's office.
Mhm.
Okay?
Yep.
And in the clerk's office were these two documents, the
So,
code.
right, so I'm gonna talk
And
about
this.
that. Well, I guess we could talk about that now, that's fine.
Okay.
So what I did was I read the town report for 2006 that had the proposed warrant,
Mhm.
and it had the minutes, no, in 2007, that had the minutes of the deliberative session and the results of the election. And all of them said, there's a copy in the town office and on the webpage of the Code of Ethics. And I get the exact wording someplace here.
Point of order,
Yes,
could we clarify for anyone watching? that
I'm sorry.
That what we're talking about is the question of what was voted on and what was passed in 2006, reference the Code of Ethics, and that there are two questions. One is, it says in the ballot article, it mentions the Code of Ethics.
right.
What it does not mention is the implementation document that was attached to the Code of Ethics in the town office.
Right.
There are some folks who believe that that implementation is binding on this committee, and so that was the question that you researched, correct?
Correct.
Thank you.
Thank you. Crap, again, the two-factor authentication, I don't have a copy of what I emailed y'all, but,
I do, I have it right here.
okay, so the exact wording on the warrant, could you read that?
I can. On the article, shall the town adopt a code of ethics which applies to all town officers, elected officials, appointed committee, official members and all town employees, period. That's Article 40.
And then it says a copy of the Code of Ethics, I think.
I believe that's in the minutes
Minutes, okay,
from the meeting. It's not in the, it does not say that in the article.
okay.
And then attached, however, as Neil pointed out, when you went to the town office, attached was this where ethics code implementation that is not mentioned specifically. It says it has an effective date and does identify itself, however, at the bottom as an ordinance, which is interesting. But again, an ordinance would have to be a voted on rule, and that would require publication of the wording in this.
But that's the point, it was.
I-
We frequently adopt articles where the entire ordinance is not printed on the ballot. If you want a copy, check with the town clerk or whatever. And that, I think, is what happened here. As you said, in the minutes, it talks about the fact that it's in the town clerk's office, so.
It says the Code of Ethics is in the town clerk's office. It doesn't say implementation specifically, and I'm not, I don't
But-
remember
But
back.
when you go to the town clerk's office, this is what you get, 2 documents.
I have a question. In '06, were we in SB2 town yet? Like, what were we? And is it recorded? My questions.
Yes.
Yes? And yes? Like,
So March, we have deliberative session minutes.
yep,
Yeah, the deliberative session minutes, which are in the 2007
Right.
report, and I sent you all a link to all of those reports. It said, the only thing it said was, Helene Kirk said there's no immediate need for this, and like there was a sentence about what she said, and then it said it was moved forward with no amendments, and that's all that were in the minutes.
That means we must have been an SB2 town.
yeah.
So, so I just did as much research as I could find, that because it said there was a copy online, I went and I searched through our webpage archives and everything, and there was nothing specifically. When you look up Code of Ethics, there's only that and not the implementation. So that's as far as I see. And I'm not trying to argue that it's not there, I just see I didn't see any,
So what you're saying is that it makes sense to you that somebody wrote an ordinance, and somebody wrote a code of ethics, and the town adopted the one without the other.
What makes sense to me is the warrant article, as a person who voted in that election, that said, do we approve the Code of Ethics? I would assume that was the Code of Ethics and not the implementation, but your stance is they're stapled together. If I go to the town, so if I'm a new employee and I go to the town clerk, will I get, and I ask for a copy of the Code of Ethics, do I get both of those?
I don't know what the town clerk gives you.
Okay.
What about item 2 here, the formation of the committee? 1 member for 1 year, 2 years, 3-year terms. If that's not part of an ordinance, then are we legally elected?
So we just had a new warrant that we were, because it was appointed, right? So didn't we just do a new warrant to appoint?
Yeah.
Right.
2
Well,
years ago?
initially, the town moderator shall appoint, and then beginning in March 2007, the voters shall elect.
So how it came to pass, right, was I was town moderator, whatever years that was. I went to the Board of Selectmen and asked them to put it back on the warrant based on some things that had occurred. It was put back on the warrant in 21, right?
I want to say 21 sounds.
21, because then we put the positions on for 22.
Yep, so 21. At that point, the town moderator, who at that point I believe was Mr. Morton, was supposed to seat a committee. For whatever reason, he didn't. And then the following 22 is when the first elections happened.
23,
23?
yeah.
All right.
Because you were on the ballot the first time. 22 was supposed to be an appointed seated committee, and that didn't happen.
Okay.
And so, the town elected a committee. In the ordinance where we elected a committee, or set up a committee, did it say anything about what the powers of the committee were to do? If this weren't,
I'm trying to remember the wording of the warrant.
no, but just generally, from a logical point of view, why would we set up an election for people where there were no instructions on what they were to do, how they were to behave?
Well, I think, you know, I'll go to, so what are the ordinances, the other ordinances that we have in town that are listed, right? So Finance Committee is by ordinance.
Yes.
Is Conservation by ordinance?
State RSA,
That's a state RSA.
planning board, state.
So, just as a question on ordinances, let's assume for a moment that this committee was made up of people who didn't have the history that some of us have in this room with the town and with the committees and all of that. Any legislative body that's passing things that are binding upon its citizenry must commit said things to writing, and they
Yes.
have to be approved by someone. And I'm not saying I know what the process of generating, developing, and approving an ordinance is in town compared to passing an article, which the town voted for, and I don't know what the clarification requirements are. But it seems to me that it's a question for an attorney, not for a
I agree.
discussion with the board.
That's fair,
I agree
that's
with
fair.
So I think we should probably forward this to the attorney and ask that
I
question.
think you're right.
How is, what part of this is binding,
Yep.
or, and I will add to that, if it's not binding, that does not mean we have to exclude the whole
Nope.
thing. This is a very good document, it's got
Yep.
a lot of useful information. It may allow us a little bit of flexibility around things like spring, training.
Sure.
What does that mean? It says meetings, I mean, you know, I'm not a constructionist on old documents, you know, times change, situations change.
you're right. I
But
think,
let's have a reading.
Yeah.
Over.
and just as a reminder, why I sort of did this last time is we were debating if we have one meeting, because it said one meeting, or are we responsible to make sure that everyone who's impacted by the Code of Ethics has an opportunity to do the training, which means multiple ones at different times of days? And to go down that, I need to know how the letter of the law from the implementation affects how we do training, because it seemed like we were in a couple minds on that. And we don't have to solve this today, like, to your point, we can send it to the lawyer, and keep moving forward. But I did want to do as much due diligence as I could to, see what I could find.
Could I propose that perhaps a subgroup of the committee draft a request to the attorney and then send it back to you to forward before the next meeting?
That would be great, thank you. Are you volunteering?
I'm a volunteer.
Thank you. Anyone else interested in helping?
I can help, but I don't know enough about the town yet to
No worries.
be.
That's
I
probably
mean, I can
better,
do later.
Yeah,
actually.
Yeah,
You know, from the perspective of looking at it with a set of fresh eyes, you know, I think that would be helpful.
Right.
yeah.
Great,
And,
Just let me know what you want me to dig into, and I'll dig.
no worries. A lot of it, I think, is here. I think the big task is just developing the question to ask the attorney.
Sure.
right,
So
Right.
you made a motion. I'm
Sure.
gonna,
Do we have a second?
I think I will second Luke's motion.
okay, do we have any more discussion?
What was the motion again?
That we create a subcommittee to
Subcommittee.
go.
Create a subcommittee?
So Naomi, if we have a question for the attorney, do we have to go before the
We do?
select board to get approval to talk to her? So it's 2 steps. It's the verbiage and then getting approval from the select board to send it to her.
So I could also schedule, if you, in your absence, you're going to be gone. So
Yeah.
if you'd like me to.
I would love
Are they meeting Monday?
We are, I posted the agenda today, fairly late.
Oh, was it? All right, so is that a problem to come and just ask to be put on the agenda with that question, or is that something that would need to be publicly notified?
I mean, you can come during public comment. I don't
That's
think.
it.
Okay, thank you so much. I appreciate that.
During public comment, they don't normally take binding votes to spend money.
No, but he can float the question and they can talk about it after under other business.
When
Monday night if they wanted to.
When Luke is not there?
I can't tell you what they wanna do.
Okay.
It's telling you the ability.
Okay. Yeah, that'd be great, if he can get a question together and,
Start it.
yeah, at least start the conversation. I mean, this, again, doesn't have to be solved by May. If it goes late, it goes late. As you pointed out, spring goes through late June.
I'm gonna write the question now.
So Carl, the motion was, should we create a subcommittee to explore preparing a question for the attorney about the ordinance? And then, I think the next thing that happened was I seconded it. We ended up going into discussion. The discussion was, how are we gonna get that in front of the Board of Selectmen, because they are the body that would approve whether or not we can ask a question of town council. They have to approve that for us, to be able to do that. So that's where the discussion went.
No, but as far as the ordinance itself, who or what generated it? Where did this,
Ordinance come from?
was this from the Board of Selectmen? Was
No
this the
idea.
town
I got it from
moderator?
Neil.
This was generated by John McCausland's committee in 2005, let's say. They proposed, there was a committee set up to do this, and they proposed both the Code of Ethics and the implementation.
Okay. So in 2005, they were
I think
discussing
that was
this.
when it was, maybe
Okay.
they worked into 2006 as well.
But the date that was on the bottom of this was May
Yeah, I think-
14, 2006.
I think
Is that
Neil
when
wrote
they
that?
finally said,
That was 60 days after the
Right.
vote, when it would be implemented.
okay.
By the terms of the ordinance.
And who would have done the vote?
Oh, that was a
'Cause
town
it-
warrant?
There was no
Town-
committee.
No, so the process would have been that the committee at that time met, came up with the code and the implementation plan associated with that. And then they put out a warrant to the town and said, shall we pass an ethics code in town? And the answer was yes. So the ethics code was adopted
One of
as
the,
it was written. The question is that attached document, the implementation guidelines or the implementation ordinance, how binding that is on future, groups, who turned it from a set of guidelines into an ordinance?
you might want to include in your question a suggestion that the attorney look at the minutes of that committee to see what it was that they were proposing, because that may influence what they thought the article meant, and whether, if the implementation ordinance was attached to the article in the town clerk's office,
Well, because
that
it's,
had some significance.
it's an interesting question to me, right? Because as a voter, you go in, they're like, oh, do you want to do this thing? Well, what's the thing? Well, if you want to know what the thing is, go see the town clerk. But I'm in a ballot, in a voting box with a ballot, how do I know?
The warrant's published.
No, I know the warrant is published, but the implementation guide that,
Was published available at the same time the warrant was published.
but if I'm in the,
Those are different words.
yeah, and so, but did the,
But if you don't do your homework,
well, I know, but,
Again, isn't this something that we're gonna get resolved rather than back
yeah,
and forth?
Sure.
yeah, that's my,
But it is, I agree, it's a
Yep.
great question.
Yep.
And it's one that needs to be resolved for everybody in the town on.
Right.
because I think it'll be instructive
Right.
on all of these
Yes,
ordinances,
agreed.
How we come about.
but make sure the question informs the attorney of the sources of information that may be relevant. If you don't mention about the fact there was a committee, and that it started in whatever, and has minutes, then the attorney doesn't have a bit of background that may or may not be relevant.
Well, I will take that under advisement. I will also say that I have pretty good faith in some of the attorneys that they're gonna go back, if they're being asked officially, and look at the record. But I agree, we have to be explicit in the question. So now, the first step, as we just discussed, is just going to the town select board to see if we can address the issue with the attorney.
Yep.
After that, what I can do is, since we have a month before our next meeting, is I can, working with Carl, we can draft a question. Now, I don't know that we can do comment on that, You know, so I guess
You can send it, you can have a one, so you can send it to all of us. One person can write just you back, you know, and you can get that advice, but we can't have a group discussion because then it's a meeting, right?
So then it just is if, the follow-on is timing. Do we wait for the next meeting to approve the question, or are we going to assume that the subcommittee that we just, did we vote on it?
Nope, and this is still
That
discussion.
we're discussing would
Right.
be, you know, or are there other people that want to be on the subcommittee,
Right.
which would also allow for dialogue?
For conversation purposes, I'm fully supportive of, I believe you have it. So I don't need to weigh back in.
No, and I'm gonna be in Texas, so I'm good. I trust you. Because honestly, the legal question that sticks in my head is, looking at what the warrant was, the way I read it, there's nothing about an implementation. And I understand, and Neil has infinite years of experience with town government and state government, and he understands more about ordinance than I ever will. But as a voter, I don't see a discussion of implementation. So really, it comes down to the lawyer, what did that warrant cover? And,
What are we bound by?
right, and honestly, I mean, it's a great document, and I think that it's definitely our guiding principles, but where this really comes down to is the, you know, if it's a must on spring training, we're in late April now, so,
And it would also, I think, more specifically dictate how we go about that training. When I read the implementation guidelines, there's some flexibilities that are removed. So we would have, you know, the meeting, the presentation, the question of, well, there's just other issues. But-
Am I understanding that you're raising this question because you don't want to follow certain parts of the ordinance?
No, sir,
No.
you are not.
Then why did you say the ordinance was restrictive with respect to education?
That was my opinion.
Well, in spring, I mean, you know, I'll throw it out there. Spring is sort of arbitrary, right? Like,
right.
so, yes, there is a defined period of time that we all agree is spring, but does it have to be spring? Like, you know,
Right.
why spring? You know, I understand it from the perspective of people being newly elected, but when I look at employees, you know, that's a rolling thing. So, you know, if we had some wiggle room, you know, would summer be
Right.
objectionable? You know, I guess those are my questions, right? Like, are we bound by the way that it is written?
Sorry, so we have a motion, we have a second. Any more discussion about the subcommittee? So, all in favor of creating a subcommittee to write a question for the lawyer and get approval from the selectmen? Currently, I know that's Luke and Carl. Anyone else? Okay. All in favor of that, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Nay?
And abstained. Okay. Great. Okay, so we have no communications, we have no mail. So the only other topic is this spring training. So I emailed y'all, I believe I did all the requested changes. I put in the page numbers, I put the timestamp on it, I put the periods where Neil mentioned the periods, I took the wording that I had. I have, on, slide 6, where it says, because I put in the full code of ethics, because we talked about that, and it said on blank on the online. It didn't say what the date, so I put here in red, March 16th, and I have no idea if that's reality, so, at some point, we need to find out what that date is and choose to either amend the code of ethics. I assume that that's what they would have done in 2006, right? That once it's approved, someone would have amended this form to put that date in, but I haven't seen a copy. Does anyone have a copy that has that filled in? All right. So I believe I made all the changes we needed. I didn't get feedback. I don't know if you want to wait for another meeting to approve it, so y'all have more chances to go look at this.
For myself?
Yeah.
I did review it. Honestly, great work. I think it was
Yep.
a good effort, and I think it would be very helpful. I had a couple of sort of picayune questions, but they're not necessarily changes that I would worry about. One of them was on page 7, where under the heading of respect, where it adds on there, sensitive about people's time, and that sort of felt disconnected to me.
But that's the code of ethics.
Okay, that's in the code of ethics, that language specifically, that makes sense that, well, it's in there though. And then on page 8, under the confidential info,
That's also code of ethics.
right, but
Yep.
the question was whether those two bullets are contradictory in any way, because one of them seems to say you can't say anything, the other says something about appropriate disclosure. And so that struck me as,
Yeah,
I can dig into that a little
Okay.
bit and make a couple suggestions.
yeah. Well, both, but, so literally, that's a copy paste of code of
Yeah.
ethics, so we might have concerns and questions around the code of ethics?
or
Like
moreover, what we
defining,
each need
yeah.
to do is, investigate and come down on a position of what those two, how to
Sure.
explain that contradiction
Yeah.
in the training, so that
Yep.
we don't leave anybody with that
That's a
question mark.
that's a great idea. Okay,
And then the only other really picky thing
Yeah.
that I had was whether we should be capitalizing all of the bullets under the exclusions on that page. You capitalized them earlier in the document.
Yeah.
You didn't there, that's
I
all.
literally copy pasted that from the doc, but, I think I did. Maybe I screwed up, but. Okay, good, so the things you saw were from the code of ethics page, but good. All right,
Yeah, I did not, I will say, I did not lay the documents next to each other and compare and contrast.
yeah. Okay. I know I have it someplace. All right, so thoughts on what you want to do with this document? Do you want to keep looking at it? Do you want to make a motion?
Question on that.
Yeah,
Some of the people who read that will be older. Is it possible to have that in 12, 14-point type?
it is, so this is, I just printed 2 per page, so
I
that's why
see.
it's so small.
Okay.
I just wanted to make sure I had something if I had to make a note, but it's,
When it's online, it will be in larger type.
correct. But that's a very good point.
My older eyes can attest that I was able to read it.
Okay, so. Yeah, so that capitalization thing is actually in the original code of ethics.
Again, that's,
Page 13 of your PowerPoint. When they talked about if yes to all, fill out the form. On what the all is, we might want to make a note on the bottom of the form, there's a checklist that whether or not you want to submit this. It just says if yes to all, fill out form. And you might want to
Yeah.
talk about, like, at the bottom of each form, talked about, does this exist? Have you tried other means? You know, you have like a little checklist down at
Yep.
the bottom. But the way it just said is if yes to all what? You know, I wasn't sure, like,
Right. I'll send you a copy of the form. that
What
I-
did we call that?
It's a complaint form and a request.
right, it was the inquiry, and the PowerPoint presentation goes through the inquiry,
Yeah.
and then the complaint, and it
I'm
says-
just trying to think, it was like screening questions, almost.
Right.
Right, yep, and I. Training documents, training, So, on the complaint form, at the
Right, down at
bottom,
the bottom,
there's a,
right.
the facts have, I have read, I believe, so we do have a checklist on the bottom, but we should, when we train, we should say, make
Right,
sure
on
that
the
it's a-
checklist that you have on this slide 13,
yeah,
it just said.
fill out this form, and this form has a checklist on it.
That's
You said 13. Yeah. So, you said, right, fill out,
Slide 13,
Right.
It says, is this an inquiry or complaint? It talked about inquiry, complaint. Is this an ethical concern? Which tenant? And then it says, if yes to all. So, like,
All
you
is
know,
not
are
to,
they talking about these two questions?
yes.
Or are we talking about, are we fulfilling everything at the bottom of the form?
That's a good question.
Before you,
Right. No, that's good.
you know, that was the part that was kind of
Yeah,
confusing
no,
to me.
that's good. Thank you for saying that because, it's my attempt to say, yes, is it an inquiry, is it ethical? And then fill out the form, which has more checklists, so we should maybe,
I wonder if you could put like a little screenshot of the form.
I do have that on the next
That-
page, yeah.
Okay, yep, with the arrow, so maybe move that. Or, I'm trying to think of how to capture it. Either move that,
To fill out the form before we show the form is
Yeah.
kind of, yep, that's valid. I mean, everything's valid, but that might make sense. So we'll talk about the forms and then.
that's what I meant about fresh eyes, Carl. Because we've been in it, right?
Right, and maybe not if yes to all, right? It's these two things, and here's the forms that you would fill out for that, but don't say fill out a form, because, yeah, so we could work on the wording on that.
And then I went to the form itself, and when I looked at the inquiry form, it says, it had a statement about section 2C of the Ware Ethics Code. And I'll go, where's that?
Sure.
I didn't understand where that is, but then I read the implementation part, not the ethics
Not the
code
code, but
itself.
the
Yep.
implementation
You go to
document.
the implementation part, then that section 2C then comes out.
Sure.
And that's where we're having the discussion about binding the two
Right,
into, one, I guess.
yeah,
for the group.
I think, I am totally open to any,
It sounds like taking the next couple of weeks, going back in and clear up those things. And that was, I think, part of what we talked about doing sort of a dry run presentation for somebody so that people could provide feedback, like you're doing right now, Carl, around this doesn't make any sense to me, or, this, where do I find this, so we can clean up our presentation a bit, I think will be useful.
for sure. And just, I think this is before the meeting, before you were here, I was just pointing out that I'm leaving,
You're out.
right? And so, everyone, okay, not you,
I
because
can-
you don't have it.
Well, no, I can,
This is in the Google Docs folder, correct? For us to edit, or is it
No,
just
I
for view?
emailed it to y'all.
you want to give me your paper copy?
Yeah,
There you go. I'll take a look at it that way.
yeah, for sure. And if anybody wants to make any changes, you're totally welcome to do so.
So, and I'll have that for next time.
Yeah,
Okay.
that'd be great. And, because if we're not trying to do a final training before next meeting, we got some time. Okay. Do we have any other topics?
Just following on to that, I just
Yeah.
wanted to start considering the idea of the next step for this. So let's assume that we have an approved training document. Would it be advisable for us to, you were talking about doing a practice training session, to maybe solicit the other committees in town for volunteers on a single night to have a run-through training session? And then the follow-on question is, would that have to be a public meeting to do the training? If it's just a exercise, we're not deliberating anything, it's just the training. Does it have to be a public meeting?
I think if three of us are in the same room doing committee business, it's a public meeting.
So if we had two people conduct the meeting, it would be okay?
Yes.
Okay. So,
Either way, I mean, it's not terrible to, you need, 24?
right, but the thing is when you're in developmental stages of training, having all of that, the sausage made,
Sure.
I think it might restrict people in the audience from being as candid as they might otherwise be if they're on, camera.
Yeah.
It's not to hide anything, because of course the end document would be obviously public and we would be presenting it. It's just in the development stage.
There's another advantage to that too. Some of this language we may understand, but nobody else does.
Exactly, exactly. That's what I'm thinking, there was, Carl brought out, I mean, is the perfect example here of not having looked at these documents, and, I've looked at it, I don't know how many times, and I
Right.
didn't pick up on that.
Sure,
It's-
yep.
So,
So going
we
with,
know what we wanna get across.
right,
We won't know if it was received until somebody
absolutely.
knows nothing about it. So anyway, I just propose considering that for the next meeting, we can discuss it further on how to do the final dry run. And then we could talk about, do we record one and post it so that, does that meet the requirement? Cause that would be another discussion. Is that, the training requirements? Cause that's the big question here is what are we required as a committee to do in terms of the training?
Right. And not saying that we only want to just hit the lowest bar.
No, no, no.
But it's, we
But
want to
need
make,
Understand
right,
what the requirement is.
But isn't that up to us?
Maybe, but the implementation document has some pretty specific asks in it, so it may or may not be flexible. That's kind of the point we're trying to clarify.
I thought that was sort of a base case, and if you wanted to do more, that was fine.
Is that the way it works with ordinances? I
No,
don't know.
it
I'm not
doesn't
being snarky, I don't know.
It doesn't prohibit you from doing more, it just says this is what you have to do. I suppose you could read it saying that's the only thing you can do,
Some people do.
but
right. And one of the questions that came up last time, so if you read the implementation, it says, hold a meeting each spring for newly elected or appointed officials, board members, and employees so that they may familiarize themselves with provisions of this code. And the first training I made wasn't actually talking about that, it was talking about process. So that entire without adding the code of ethics, I missed the bar completely with what I presented. But the process is important, I think. So would we have two, one to talk through the lines of the code of ethics and one to talk about the process? And then it says it's the responsibility of the supervisor of any new employee to ensure that employee familiarize themselves with the provisions. So it says, we're gonna hold a meeting so that they may familiarize themselves, but then it's up to the supervisor to ensure that they familiarize themselves. So it's like we're giving a service to help them do what's
Right.
their responsibility, and so,
But if we're, again, depending on how restrictive it is, if we're only allowed to do one meeting and they all have to attend that one meeting and someone can't, how does that
Right.
get captured? So, again, clarification is in order.
is the requirement that we offer, or is the requirement that
that we
they
hold,
attend?
it says, no, it's that we hold a meeting.
So if nobody came, we would meet the requirement.
That's how it's written. That's how I read it, anyway.
But then the follow-on contradiction is the next, I believe, statement talks about the supervisor being responsible for new employees to familiarize themselves with this, in which case, what is that,
Very simple. Here's a copy of the code. Please read it.
perhaps?
I mean, de minimis, that would do.
At its base.
Well, it says that they ensure that the employee familiarize themselves, so that's ensure, that's a follow, like,
Well, I'll ask the employee whether in fact he followed my instructions and read the code.
which is
And if
different
he
than,
says
here's the
yes,
code.
Yes, and, well, there are two things. And if he says yes to that second question, then I think arguably, it's de minimis, but arguably I fulfilled the ordinance's requirement.
I'm assuming there's some signed sheet in an employee file somewhere that says I've read and
Sure.
reviewed and understand the Ware Code of Ethics.
Right.
Understand?
Well,
Usually it's in there.
well, I mean, but this is where the rubber kind of meets the road. When we're holding employees accountable to things, they need to be clear on what they're being held accountable to.
Yeah.
And so it's not de minimis to provide the appropriate training to them. And if it falls on us, that's one thing. If it falls on their supervisor, that's another. It says the supervisor shall ensure they are familiarized with it.
Yeah.
That's pretty vague. So again, if this is a flexible document, we can flex all we want and we can make something that makes common sense and works for the need. If it is an inflexible document, then this is the minimum that we have to do on all these points, and then we can talk about whether or not we can modify it in any way without getting into trouble.
As a practical matter, I assume that you, like the rest of you, like me, have a great deal of difficulty in understanding what the code is. That is to say, I can read the words, but when I think of all the situations to which they might apply, I'm overwhelmed. So, to Elaine's point, if I as an employee have to sign a statement that I read and understand the code, I couldn't sign that statement.
Is it- Right, well, they do, right? I have read the code, you have signed this.
No,
It says.
yes, I have
right?
signed that, but clearly, that was an incorrect, on my part, an incorrect signature, because I don't understand the code. I don't think anyone understands the code, and we are, in fact, as a committee, going to interpret what the code means. So, in a particular case, we may decide section 1 means something, but when I sign it, this sheet, would have no idea, nor would any of you, that that's the conclusion to which you'll come in a particular case where section 1 is under discussion. The code is very vague.
Well, while I agree that it is true, I do think that there would be, in the case of a conflict, a decision about whether or not, the discussion on the interpretation of the code and reasonableness and all of that. That's part of why they have this process for hearings and all, to clear up questions like that. But if someone doesn't, in my world, if I don't understand a document, I'm not signing the document, particularly if it says, I understand, and I am held to some level of account, and then I'll even further add, as a condition of employment, adds a whole nother level, which is to say, it's one thing for us committee folks, it's another for the folks who are employees of the town.
Did you sign this?
I did.
And do you
In
understand the
my
code?
opinion, I understand the code sufficiently for the purposes I have to affect it. Yes,
My hat's off to you.
mine is,
Carl, you signed this, right?
Yes, I did.
Did it,
It was very basic terms. It wasn't anything in detail. And I looked at it with my ability on past ethics things, that it was okay to me. But again, we're still a committee that will look at any issue that's brought up, and we might have 3 people that say yes, and 2 people say no, and we go with the consensus. But it's not set in stone, every term or interpretation of every term.
right,
We could spend years just on the word "the,"
true, Yeah.
instead of using "thus."
yeah,
It's just, I don't want to get into semantics of everything that's written down on a piece of paper. That's not our purpose. You know. What, have we looked at other ethics committees to see what they've done as far as training and implementation?
Yeah, and, I'll be curious to see if the Board of Selectmen, agree that, we can get advice on this. I think it'll be good for us, I think it would be a good place to go next. And then, I appreciated that you spent a little bit more time, digging in when I looked at the revision. I could tell that you went back. And I think that comes from how much time we've spent in the weeds,
right,
right?
Right,
So, and I'm
right.
trying not to go back there at this
Correct.
moment. But I think we're at a good place to kind of move forward with that question, and it'll give us a little bit more clarity about next steps. To your point, Luke, I do think that when we come back next time, once, I take a look, make some recommendations, I think we'll be at a spot for us to be able to put out hey, we're doing a dry run.
right.
Well, we can figure out probably for agenda at the next meeting about, who wants to do it, who wants to train, be those 2 trainers. Understanding that, it will be, in draft and imperfect, and that what we're looking for the purposes of that meeting is feedback, to be able to refine, so.
good. All right. Any other conversation?
So did we ever vote? We did vote on the
We did.
committee.
We did.
Yes, we
Yeah.
did.
We did.
I know.
It occurred to me as soon as I said it that we had.
Yeah,
I have nothing else.
okay.
It passed.
Thank you.
Anyone else? All right, so it's a quick meeting, which is good, because I get to go on vacation. So I will close our April something, 18th, 2004, meeting of the Ware Ethics Committee. Thank you all for sticking with
When
us.
is our next meeting?
It is on the agenda.
It's on the
May-
agenda.
It's the third Thursday of May.
6 o'clock?
It's like the 16th, at 6 o'clock, yep.
Okay.
Yep,
Alrighty,
excellent, thank you, guys.
thank you.
Enjoy Austin.
Thank you, I will. Lots of Tex-Mex.